Hello, Workplace Math 10 students. This is the 11th lesson in the graphing unit, and this is going to be on frequency histograms. So let's take a look at what this will look like. So in your Google Classroom, you will see the G11 histograms assignment, and the mathletics assignment that this is linked to is the frequency histograms. So let's get into these discussions. So as we discussed before, we have talked about line graphs. We have talked about bar graphs. We've talked about pie graphs. We've talked about pictographs. And in the last couple of lessons, we talked about tally charts and how those can turn into histograms. So today we're going to be talking specifically about a particular type of histogram known as a frequency histogram. So as you see here with this example, you can see that the reason why it's called a frequency histogram is that on the vertical axis, this axis here, what it's showing us is the frequency, the number of occurrences for a particular type of value. So in this particular case, what it's saying is when the score falls in the range of 2, then this is how many times that score was 2. So in this case, there were 6 scores that were 2. There were 8 scores that were 4, and so forth. So we talked last day about the fact that a histogram provides a visual interpretation or a visual representation of numerical data, and that generally this information is organized into categories also known as bins. So we have bin 2, bin 4, bin 6, bin 8, and bin 10. Now a frequency histogram is just a little bit different in that, like we said, it's talking about the frequency. So it represents the frequency of a data point or range of data points occurring in a set of data. So how frequently does the number 2 occur in the set of data? Now, we have been discussing histograms for now 2 lessons, and I just wanted to introduce a concept as well, something called the measures of central tendency. And you may have heard about this in your previous math classes. The key measures of central tendency are what we call mean, median, and mode. And we'll also discuss something that's often linked with that, which is something called range. Now, if we look at this example that we actually have here, what we see is that this histogram is telling us that the number 2 occurred 6 times. And so what I did here is I put the number 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6 times. Now, same thing with 4, I put the number 4, and you can see those in purple, 8 times, and the number 6 occurs 7 times, the number 8 occurs 4 times, and the number 10 occurs 5 times. Now, when we organize the data set, so this is essentially the data set, the amount of data that would have been able to make us this histogram. Now, if we wanted to figure out the mean, in other words, another word for mean is the average of what the value is for each of this full data set. What we'd have to do is we'd have to take each of these numbers and we'd have to add them up. So we'd go 2 plus 2 plus 2 plus 2 plus 2 plus 2 and plus 4 plus 4 and so forth. When we plug all those into our calculator, we would get a total of 168. Now, we also then have to figure out how many numbers are in this data set. And you could count up all these numbers, but basically there are 30 different numbers. There's 6 2s, there is 8 4s, there is 7 6s, there is 4 8s, and there's 5 10s, which adds up to 30. So we take the total of all of these numbers and we divide it by the number of values in that data set, and this gives us the actual mean. So the mean of this number is 5.6, which means it kind of falls somewhere between the 4 and the 6 value here. Now, the median, what this represents, represents the middle score in a set of data when we organize it from lowest to highest, like I've done here. So what we see here is that when we think about the fact that there's 30 numbers, the middle number in that would be right at number 15 and 16. So basically, if I went 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, and then this 6 and this 6 are numbers 15 and 16 in this data set. And this is exactly the middle of this whole set of information. Now, when we have an even number of values in our data set, we're going to always have two numbers that really fit on either side of that middle point. And in this case, it's really simple because both of those numbers are 6. But let's say one of the numbers was 6 and the other number was 9. We would add those two numbers together and then divide it by 2. And then that's going to give us the value. So in the case of this, 6 plus 6 equals 12. We divide that by 2. Well, then the middle number, the median number, in other words, is 6. So it's saying that this is sort of the middle of that data set. But if it was 6 plus 9, that would be 15. 15 divided by 2 is 7.5. That would be the middle point in that case. But obviously in this case, it is 6 and 6. Now the last central tendency thing that we look at is what one is the most frequently occurring in this. And this is really easy to see. The mode is really easy to pick out in a histogram because it's the one that's got the highest bar. In other words, the number that occurs the most frequently, because it's showing frequency, is going to be the highest bar. And in this case, we can see that there are 8 occurrences of the number 4, and therefore the mode in this case, the most frequent number is the number 4. Now, those are the 3 central tendency things that we can do, but there is something that's usually tied to that, and that's something called the range. And the range is the difference between the lowest and the highest value in a set of data. So we have data all the way from 2 to 10. So basically the highest number is 10, the lowest number is 2. So we take the difference between that, and the range of these set of data is 8. Hopefully that makes sense to you. Now you may say, well, why do we need to know this? Well, we don't really need to know most of this information to do the next mathletics assignment, except you do need to understand this concept of range, and you may see the reference to the word mode, in which case you're looking for the biggest, the highest bar number here, okay? So let's take a look at some examples of from the mathletics assignment. So one of the mathletics questions will be something like this. It says, which score has a frequency of 7? So basically, what we're looking at is we're seeing that this is the frequency of 7. And when we go across, which of these scores has a frequency of 7? Well, oh, it is the one that's yellow. And so that score, the score that represents the yellow score, is 30. And that's why that is the correct answer. So I'm just going to click here and then come back to clear that off. And then let's take a look at another example of a question. So this score is saying which score occurs most often. So in other words, this is another example. We could call this, instead of saying this, if we wanted to be technical, we could say what is the mode? Because the most frequently occurring is the mode, right? So we're looking for the bar that is the highest. And what bar is the highest? Well, this bar here is the highest, and that represents the score 9. And therefore, that's why that is the correct answer. Because the most frequently occurring score was this one, because it had 8 occurrences of our Kate frequency. So I'm just going to go back and clear that off again, and then come back in here. So let's take a look at another example. So now this is where we talked about that concept of range. So remember, range is essentially what the highest number was in the data set, and the highest number and the lowest number. So the highest number here is 20. The lowest number is 4. So the difference between these two, 20 minus, remember difference is the same as saying minus, 20 minus 4 is 16. Now, if for whatever reason you weren't able to do that in your head, we can go to our calculator and just double check that. But basically, we have 20, which is the highest number, minus the lowest number, which is 4. So the difference between those two, in other words, the range of those numbers, is 16. And so that's why when we come back in here, we will see that the correct answer is, in fact, 16. Now here is another question here, and this one is a little bit more involved. So basically what we see here is it's asking us how many results are greater than 5. So the score here is greater than 5. So 5, this bar here doesn't match that, but this bar here, which is 10, this bar that's 15, this bar that's 20, and this one that's 25 scores, all match that. So basically these 4 frequencies, how many times these occur, all fit into which results are greater than 5. So when we look at this, there are 9 occurrences of this, there are 6 occurrences of this, there are 7 occurrences of this, and there are 5 occurrences of this. So what we have to do is we have to add up all 4 of those occurrences values. So 9 plus 6 plus 7 plus 5. And now obviously that's, not easy to do in our head, but I will give you a little hint. It is in fact 27, and that's why that value is correct here. But let's just go into our calculator and just see that again. So if we click into our calculator, we are going to see that if we put down our occurrences, so the first one was 9, the next one was 6, the next one was 7, and the last occurrence for 25 was 5, we end up with a value of 27. So that's why we have this as our value and our correct answer. So hopefully that makes sense to you. So you can work through that histogram, frequency histogram mathletics assignment. And once again, as always, if you have any questions, please do not hesitate to send me an email.